Hello and welcome to the Majlis, a Central Asia podcast at Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. I am Mohammed Tahir, Director of the Turkmen Service at Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. Turkmenistan's foreign minister just concluded 3-day visit to volatile northern Afghanistan, held discussions with local officials. The visit came 3 days after a visit by several local militia commanders from northern Afghanistan to Turkmenistan, where some of whom got free medical treatment. Also earlier, we learned some of the prominent religious figures from northern Afghanistan also visited Ashgabat, holding meetings with Turkmen officials. This all came as militants continue to advance in northern Afghanistan, where Afghan Vice President General Dostum remains engaged in fierce fighting to curb the advance of the militants. In this episode of Majlis, we will be discussing Turkmenistan's Afghanistan dilemma in the face of increasing instability just across the border in northern Afghanistan. To discuss the subject, I have Dr. Gennady Rutkovich, a Central Asia specialist who is also assistant professor in political science at Georgia College. Dr. Rutkovich, welcome to the Majlis.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being part of the Majlis today. Also, I have Amin Mudakkik, a journalist who hails from northern Afghanistan and is currently director of Radio Mashal, which broadcasts to troubled tribal region of Pakistan. Amin, welcome to the Majlis.
Thank you.
Thank you. As always, joining me is Bruce Pannier, editor of Kishlak Awazi, Central Asia blog at Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. Bruce, very nice to have you.
Thank you.
Welcome, gentlemen, to the Majlis. First, let's start with you. What is the latest in northern Afghanistan? It's been almost 2 months since General Dostum is in Jowzjan province, which has a border with Turkmenistan. As we know, he is obviously intending to drive out Taliban or the militants. Is he succeeding?
I think he's succeeding very much because 2 months ago, my information was that the Taliban has almost encircled the provincial capitals of Faryab, in Jowzjan, in Saripol, and in some key cities like Aqcha. In Aqcha, where I have relatives, I've been talking to them in touch constantly. They even evacuated their families because in the city was almost have a deserted look because it was expected that the Taliban will run it in hours or not even in days. But suddenly the arrival of General Dostum changed the landscape immensely, and he had a very much impact because and obviously he had all the resources, he had all the authorities, he had all the forces, and all the experiences. Now the situation is much different. The highway connecting Mazar to Jowzjan and Faryab is secure. Aqcha is pretty much secure. The Taliban has been driven out from around Shibarghan city. They are even crashed in Dashti Laili, and the highways of Antkhoy in between Aqina and Faryab in Aqina Shibarghan is pretty much safe now. As you heard probably a few days ago, Commander Rahim Dad, who was mainly disturbing traffics between Aqina and Antkhoy, in Aqina and Faryab, has surrendered due to immense pressure from General Dostum forces, and he has made differences.
Haven't we heard the same story in the previous visits by General Dostum to northern Afghanistan? Then things quickly changes.
Yeah,
when he
this is still a problem because General Dostum is not able to work on a system. He is working as an individual. So as soon as the individual disappears, the whole success story disappears again. He cannot find, unfortunately, if you talk a conspiracy theory, he probably does not want to find someone who is reliable as he, because he probably want people to depend on him as a kingmaker or as a master of security. But someone who has the same authority, someone who has the same experience, someone who has the same resources, unfortunately not there so far in these 3 provinces. But as long as he is in the area, he can help. Even if it is a temporary help, that kind of security, then at least remain for a couple of months or at least up to 6 months.
This kingmaker, as you said, this kingmaker is adding a new element to that conflict in northern Afghanistan. Early this week, I think you heard and I heard the speech that he made criticizing the Afghan government in which he is part of as a vice president. He was accusing the top 2 officials like chief executive and the president in power grabbing and injustices that he thinks was made on him. So the North is already in trouble. So what this frustration on behalf of Dostum is going to add into the already existing insecurity or increasing insecurity in northern Afghanistan?
I think this will not add to the increasing insecurity because he has to work for the security of the North. If he does not work for the security of the North, he will have no place to go there. North is his birthplace, North is his power base, so he has to secure at least these three provinces of Faryab, Jawzjan, and Saripol. If these three provinces are not secure, Dostum will have no value. That statement is more a kind of bargaining. In a time of success, he needs to get more reward. And I think he deserves it because if you look at this 50-50 distribution of power,
between Chief Executive Abdullah and
Dr. Ghani, Dr. Abdullah is pretty much distributing it, but on the Ghani camp, he is not getting that much. In the way he mentioned that he has only 2 governors of Jawzjan and Faryab selected or elected on his demand. There is no much high-ranking post in his followers' hand. I mean, he is saying that if there is if the power base is based on distribution, so he should also get it. If it's not, then he has no problem. But as he see that seats are being distributed between all camps, so why not him?
I mean, sorry, I'm again coming to you. Did you sense what he's going to do next in case of his conditions are not met?
That will be more a kind of bureaucratic grumbling, in the Karzai. I mean, he will not do anything which affect negatively the security of the North, and he is not in that position, to announce a kind of independent fiefdom or independent zone in that North. I mean, he cannot do pretty much militarily against the center, because if the center does not support him, he will not be able to secure his own area. It's more and more a kind of reminding or pressuring his own camp of President Ghani camp to give him more power. Otherwise, he will not play an active role in security of the North, which in turn it will put the center under pressure.
But he is saying like he is ready to sit in the opposition instead if these things
No, in that was I carefully listened to him. He was telling President Ghani that it was better for the whole camp to sit in opposition rather than distributing this 50-50, because that, according to him, affects security negatively. It means that in his zone, in a province, one commander, the police commanders come from Dr. Abdullah camp, and the military commander come from the Ghani camp, and these two people do not obey each other. They do not coordinate. They take orders from different sources. Yeah. So in that sense, he was saying that to have a better security, it was much better that we had given all power to Dr. Abdullah, or all power to us.
Look, Bruce, he is one of the main actors in the Afghan politics. When it comes to northern Afghanistan, he is the main actor in terms of security, in terms of influence and everything, and he is frustrated. How do you see things going forward in that region, which has lots of problems already?
I certainly agree with Amin that, Dostum's appearances in the north have greatly helped stability in that region. My only problem is always, and again, as Amin noted, he's from the north, and that's really been his power base for really ever, as long as he's been around as a general, even going back to the 80s. But my only question is, when he does finally get secure, he's working toward getting the area more secure. Maybe he'll get it all secure one day, and in return, he expects what exactly? That's the only thing that I'm wondering about. It's great that he does all this, and I would like to think that at the end, if he does accomplish all his goals, that he will just turn to Kabul and say, "There you go, I took care of business." But I have a feeling, knowing the man for many, many years and having watched him progress, that he'll say, "No, I took care of it, and my reward for doing what you could not do is going to be what?" Or he probably even knows what that will be. But I don't think he's going to just say, "Okay, I did my job, and now I'm done, and I'm coming back to Kabul," without anything in return.
Yeah, he asked for the reward. He specifically mentioned in saying that he needs at least 10 embassies, allocated to his people.
Ambassadors,
he needs, 10 ambassadors, and out of 170, diplomatic missions. And he also said that he needs at least a seat of deputy minister in the key security ministries like interiors and defense. He outlined some of his demands.
Dostum is obviously one of the main actors. Let's see, there are several other actors like militants. Some of them are foreign militants. There are Arbaki commanders when it comes to the security picture of northern Afghanistan, and then you have Jamiat Junbish, like Jamiat being the ethnic Tajik group's party in Afghanistan, Junbish being the Dostum head of the party. So their clash. So today, just to draw a little bit a small map, who are the actors on northern Afghanistan, and what are their base of strength and motivations and interests there?
Well, and by northern Afghanistan, if you mean the whole north, then obviously we have Commander Atta.
Obviously.
In there, and then we have actors in Kunduz. This is a broader picture.
Mm-hmm.
But if you mean these three provinces,
let's see the three provinces.
In the three provinces,
three provinces being Jowzjan, Saripul, Faryab.
And Faryab.
Yeah.
I think in the three provinces there are 2 or 3 kind of main actors. One is the government side, which is represented by Dostum.
Mm-hmm.
Seconds are, to my surprise, the Turkmen commanders,
right.
Turkmen Talibans, who are the most resilient, who are the most tough fighters in that area. In Dostum is facing the most.
Let's clear that these are the local Turkmen commanders.
These are the local Turkmen commanders, but they studied in Pakistan.
Right.
They came from Pakistan,
mm-hmm.
and traditionally the young Turkmens would obey their elders, but right now they don't obey their elders. And the elders are also not pushing so hard because they have their own grievances against Dostum.
Mm-hmm.
You probably heard that before this current governor, the previous governor was Turkmen, and he was sacked by Dostum. And the Turkmens were very
in
angry.
Jowzjan, right?
In Jowzjan, and they were very angry about that. So these are the second actors. And the third actors are these local Talibans, local militant, who are not so hard, who are not ideological Taliban, but they joined the Taliban either for their own security or for their economic problems or for their even social problems. They have personal enmity with people. Like this commander Rahim Dad, he is a Tajik, he's from Faryab. He was former military officer in that area. He developed some differences. He just joined the Taliban with hundreds of his own soldiers. So he knows the weak points, he knows the security posts, so he was giving very tough time. But now Dostum came in and assured him that, hey guy, you will enjoy even more freedom here. You will enjoy more economic prosperity here. You will enjoy high ranking positions. Even I was told by a reporter just today that the notorious commander, Uzbek commander Zarqawi, who was fighting with alongside the Taliban a month ago, now he's walking free with thousands of his militiamen. This is another concern.
This Uzbek commander is from Afghanistan?
Yeah.
Uzbekistan?
He's from Afghanistan.
Okay.
He was nicknamed Zarqawi, because he was so much notorious. And all these people who were surrendered, they were not tortured, they were not jailed. They have their own freedom with all the demands, the armed band, escorting them with the same vehicles, even with the more logistic support. So this kind of created another concern with the people, that more and more militia and more armed people are coming into the streets, into the cities, in the villages.
And you mentioned several groups, like, Dostum being one group, the government is the other, Arbaki commanders the other, the Turkmen.
No, Dostum is representing the government.
He has his own interest, obviously.
Of course.
Which is separate than the government.
Yeah, but in that area, there is nobody else representing government.
Right.
Because when he goes to the fighting, the army, police, local militia, everyone go under his command.
Okay, let's see. Government is interest. Dostum is personal ambitions, whatever that is. Arbaki commanders, Turkmen commanders, Taliban, local Taliban, the foreign Taliban. And none of them are working with each other, right?
Well, the Arbakis, local militias, which they call Khezish Mardumi, government and police are apparently working under Dostum. The foreign Talibans are working under the Turkmen leadership, Turkmen Talibans. And the others, this local Talibans who are not ideological Taliban, have their own setting under the tribal jurisdiction.
Dr. Rutkovich, very, very interesting picture drawn by Amin, who's himself is from northern Afghanistan, so obviously we are benefiting from his local knowledge in this discussion. So looking from where you are, what is your reading of the situation in northern Afghanistan so far?
Well, it looks like a very volatile situation, and I think I read a report from Bruce from a month ago which talked about something very similar of Dostum coming in, Dostum clearing out, Dostum leaving, Taliban coming in. And the problem with such volatility is once he leaves, we could easily go back to the previous situation. And if these local actors, if they change sides so quickly and without punishment, apparently, then one day, whether it's a month from now, a year from now, or 5 years from now, we could have a situation where they decide that being on Dostum's side or being on government side is not in their interest. And in that case, the fighting will end up in a very different direction than what it has right now.
Is that a possibility, do you see? My guests here, Bruce, Amin?
I mean, definitely. Amin just mentioned this ethnic Uzbek commander, Zarqawi. I mean, he's a free agent, so to speak. Whoever's willing to, whichever way the wind's blowing, whoever looks to be winning or whoever's willing to pay the most amount of money or give the most benefits or something, this guy's going to side with him. And this is not the kind of ally you want. It doesn't go very far in a long-term security effort.
Yeah. I mean, what went wrong in northern Afghanistan that we have this result today, this outcome today?
Well, that comes from across the borders. The problem was that the people were, all the international community and the observers, they were blaming Pakistan for interfering in Afghanistan. And the reason was that most of the disturbance against the government was in area bordering Pakistan.
Yeah.
But Pakistan, in order to dispel this impression, pumped a lot of their Uzbeks, Turkmen, and Tajik Talibans who were really met in their madrasa. There were thousands of them. So they pushed them inside Afghanistan. They paid them, and I even talked to some of them on phone who surrendered to the government. They admitted that they were receiving quarterly budget from Pakistan. So that was the main reason that the Pakistan wanted to dispel the impression that only those neighboring Pakistans are having militancy. So they pushed the Taliban deep into Afghanistan. That started, and then the demographic structure of the north is also contributing to the support to the militancy. You see, in every province, one tribal group is dominant in power, and they deprive the others, and they crush the others, unfortunately. In the same situation like prevail in Kunduz, the same situation prevail in Jawzjan, where Turkmen have grievances in Kunduz, thousands of Pashtuns have grievances. You see the toughest resistance in the more support in Kunduz is from Chardara in other districts, which is mainly populated by Pashtuns. In Jawzjan, as I told you, the Turkmens who have grievances from the Uzbeks, they are paying the toughest resistance.
Mm-hmm. Today we are mainly talking about three provinces, Dr. Rutkovich. They are Faryab, Saripul, and Jawzjan. All of them has border with Turkmenistan, and Turkmenistan has a border of nearly 740 kilometers with Afghanistan. And the region, which is increasingly going lawless, is also that part of the country. In this case, when a Turkmen looks across the border from Turkmenistan into Afghanistan, what do they see?
Well, I think one issue that we haven't talked about is the Taliban itself having three different leaders in the last few years. And with three different leaders, it's not exactly clear what we mean by the Taliban. I think we talked about how you have the Turkmen Taliban, and then you have the local Taliban. Then, of course, you have the overall national Taliban, the Pakistani Taliban. And I'm not sure that all of these Taliban are looking at Turkmenistan in the same way. I think some of them, the national ones seem to be more passive, more willing to stay out of Turkmenistan and to leave things be. I think there were reports from a year ago when they were on the island and they were simply willing to leave. But the more local Taliban, maybe they're more extreme, maybe they're just not willing to listen to their elders, even in the Taliban, and they might see Turkmenistan as a weak country or at least a weak region to hide from Dostum, to hide from other Afghan officials. So I think it depends entirely on which Taliban actors you're talking about, and these Taliban actors aren't very stable, as in today, one of them might be in the ascendancy in those regions, and some other day it might be someone else. So I think depending on simply who's there at any given moment, you're going to have a very different policy towards Turkmenistan, assuming there is a policy of the Taliban towards Turkmenistan.
Yeah, obviously things are changing there very rapidly. Bruce, the same question to you. So if you would be a Turkmen president, let's assume, what would you see from Ashgabat looking into northern Afghanistan?
The Turkmen president, that's a good way to put it. I would prefer to look at it as through the eyes of a security official, because I'm not really sure what information the Turkmen president gets about what's happening south of the border. If I was a security official at the top, I would be very concerned by the fact that as 3 years ago, this was a very stable area. It didn't seem to be a problem. Many economic plans that for Turkmenistan's future involved areas in northern Afghanistan, not just the Tapi pipeline, but also the railway, plans to export electricity to parts of northern Afghanistan, and to watch over the last 36 months and see that the area has turned from being relatively peaceful into being absolutely unpredictable, with sporadic outbreaks of extreme violence, which in some cases have been right on the Turkmen border, would have to be very discomforting to the people on the Turkmen side of the border. Not only do they have to worry about their own security, but they have to put a lot of plans for their future on hold until they can figure out what exactly is happening in the north and what the chances are that the situation will return to what it was 3, 4, 5 years ago.
Okay, so let's take a short break here. When we come back, we will discuss what is the strategy by the Turkmen authorities to handle the rapidly changing security situation just across the border in northern Afghanistan. Now, in the first half of the discussion, we have been talking about changing security picture in northern Afghan provinces, which has a direct border with Turkmenistan. Now, let's debate here about what Turkmenistan is doing about it and how effective it has been. Debating the subject with me is Dr. Gennady Rutkovich, Central Asia specialist, who is also assistant professor in political science at Georgia College. Amin Mudakik, a journalist from northern Afghanistan, and he is currently serving as a director of Radio Mashal, which broadcasts to troubled region of Pakistan. Bruce Pannier, editor of Qishlaq Awazi, Central Asia blog at Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. I'm Mohammed Tahir, director of the Turkmen service at Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. Gentlemen, welcome back to the Majlis. Bruce, talking about the Turkmenistan's Afghan strategy, so what do you see on their table?
Well, it just changed again. They seem to be trying to stay out of it as much as possible, although even there's been some variation in their policy. So we talked earlier about some of these local Taliban commanders and how they changed sides. The Turkmen government itself has changed its attitude a couple times. They reached out to the people in the north, their ethnic kin across the border, and started to negotiate with them and talk about helping them out with electricity, with damming up the rivers so that it wouldn't move, a little bit of very loose, low-level trade, things like that. And then all of a sudden they withdrew from them and started fortifying the border and putting up walls and digging ditches, and they broke off contact with the people they had in the north, and now all of a sudden they've come back again, which is underscored by the Turkmen foreign minister's recent visit there. So now they've changed their policy again. If I was a local official in northern Afghanistan, I would be very grateful to see Turkmen officials show up and offer help. But at this point, after the last couple of years of them going back and forth, I would wonder how long this policy is going to remain in place. And will they change their mind? Would one serious offensive by the enemy all of a sudden change the Turkmen government's policy and force them back into the isolation policy, which they were practicing for most of last year, where they just didn't want to get involved and they were trying to keep the contagion, for lack of a better word, in Afghanistan by walling off their border and trying to keep the problems out.
So you're saying at best the strategy that Turkmenistan is applying to northern Afghanistan is confusing and unpredictable.
Absolutely, it's gone back and forth. Now it's engagement again. It was engagement, it was isolationism. Now it's engagement.
So the engagement is what the Rashid Meredov, the Turkmen foreign minister, was looking for in last 3 days in northern Afghanistan.
I would imagine that was a huge part of it. Now, as far as the Turkmen government's concerned, they probably will spin this as talks about selling electricity and building the railroad through the north, possibly something to do with Tapi. those negotiations could have been taking place in a lot of places. Kabul, Ashgabat, there was no reason for him to actually go to these areas in the north unless he had something else on the agenda, which I imagine was probably to personally get a good look at what the security situation was in northern Afghanistan, find potential reliable partners that Turkmenistan could depend upon to preserve stability along the border and make sure that nothing spilled over onto the Turkmen side. And then just see, are any of these projects actually viable, or what's the time schedule now for some of these? So what's the time schedule for the railroad? Obviously, it's later than they thought. What's the time schedule for TAPI? How realistic is it to export? They want to increase exports of electricity to Afghanistan, and Afghanistan wants them to increase exports of electricity. Is that possible? Is this year, next year, anytime in the next decade? So those kind of things, which you can only really answer if you actually are on the ground to see it for yourself. All the assurances from officials in Kabul or people who travel to Ashgabat don't really mean much. It's really important to be on the ground and take a good look at what's happening. Travel the highway, maybe get a feel for the security situation personally.
You are saying that it was kind of fact-finding mission for those projects?
Or reconnaissance, if you want to look at it that way.
But the other interesting thing from this visit is like the highest ranking officials that he met during 3 days was the governor of the province, and who I believe has no authority in implementing or discussing the projects like TAPI, like cross-country electricity or cross-country railway projects. And I think these are the things, as Bruce, you mentioned, it has to be better to discuss in Kabul or with officials who has the real authority. And again, talking about those projects in that region, in meeting with governors and local people, he did not say anything new on that. He did not bring anything new on the table. Just kind of confusing. I mean, I know you have a different version or a slightly different opinion about that.
The main reason was that to participate in the groundbreaking ceremony at Aqina, it was a railroad link between the Aqina and the Turkmen side. It goes from the
like 3 kilometers railway line.
Something like this. So he came in, and also he wanted to visit another project which was to strengthen, to build a retaining wall on the Amu River. But unfortunately, there was a mine blast, which hit his convoy, and he returned from that places. And there was some kind of behind-the-scene activities that he was doing, which is Turkmenistan is always known for that. They work more behind the scene rather than on the surface. A journalist told me that when he came to the governor of Jawzjan office, and then he didn't talk to the media, and the meeting was held behind a closed door. And the same was in Balkh, and the same was in Faryab. In my view, Turkmenistan strategy right now is two prongs. One is this apparent, because they want to expand their economic activities, not for economic interest, but to make the people of northern Afghanistan more dependent on them. Because, this electricity, this railway project, the road projects does not benefit only the government, it benefits the whole populations, which include the Taliban. So Turkmenistan electricity in Faryab are distributed in villages which are under the Taliban. So when the Taliban start disturbance against Turkmenistan, they will lose the electricity as well. That's why they want to kind of impress the local populations, kind of making them dependent on them, not to side with those who are anti-Turkmenistan. This could be one element.
But it looks like Turkmenistan is taking side. This visit came just 3 days after the news that we broke in the Turkmen service of some local militia commanders who are engaged in fighting against the Taliban or the militants who went to Turkmenistan, being treated, some of them at least told us that being treated free of charge by the authorities. This news was made public. So could there be any connection between this unannounced visit and that news?
It is part of this kind of security measures. That treating the local militia was one element. Coming here and talking directly to the governors, promising more help is another step. So in 3-4 years, in the delegation of ulama also visited Turkmenistan.
Yes.
In 3 years, this couple of groups is nothing. Who knows that they are probably doing more to the Taliban. They are probably paying more than that to the Taliban. because during the Taliban government, the Turkmenistan was the only Central Asian country which has consulate in Herat. I personally went there. I met the consul, and they had consulate in Mazar, and they have full-fledged embassy in Kabul. So they deal with everyone who can save their interests and who can secure their borders.
And these are conflicting parties. I mean, like Taliban, meeting with the Taliban, and also at the same time with the local militia. There is a saying in Turkmen language, or maybe some other languages, that you cannot hold two watermelons on one hand.
They have been doing this for years. Even at that time, they had good relation with the government of Rabbani, and they had good relation with the government of Taliban. This is the thing. I mean, the electricity which they provide to Faryab and Jawzan is not going only to the government. It goes to all the Taliban villages as well. See?
Bruce, save us.
I mean, if I was the Taliban, I would have a lot of questions about the visit by these Arbaki and the local police commanders, and why they were able to get in and out of Turkmenistan so easily. And we also got to remember too that the Russian defense minister was just there, the first ever visit by a Russian defense minister at the start of this month. And then we find out he's barely gone, and we find out the Arbaki are some Arbaki commanders are in Turkmenistan. It looks very suspicious, and you got to kind of wonder if the Turkmen, I know it's their history that the Turkmen government wants to be on amicable terms with everyone possible, so that whoever comes to the top, whoever emerges victorious, they'll have good feelings toward Turkmenistan. But I do think that, especially with Muradov's visit, if I was a Taliban commander in northern Afghanistan, I would start to wonder a lot if they hadn't decided that after the Russian visit with the Arbaki commanders in Turkmenistan, if Turkmenistan wasn't trying to side with the government's or pro-government forces that were in the north at this moment, sensing that maybe that was their best bet for getting their economic projects through.
Dr. Rutkovich, how do you read these conflicting moves on behalf of Turkmenistan? Do you think it might be part of their strategy?
I think Turkmenistan has two contrasting interests here, and they're really conflicting. One is this whole policy of permanent neutrality, which I don't think is a pragmatic policy. I think it's a part of their ideology. It's how they justify their own existence to their own people, plus to countries like Russia and the United States. And if they were to formally abandon this policy, I think they'd risk losing legitimacy domestically. Probably wouldn't get overthrown or anything of the sort, but there would be instability which they don't want to cause. On the other side, they want to have stable borders with Afghanistan, and it looks like they think the situation degenerates to such an extent that they're willing to make some sacrifices in the neutrality policy, like allowing foreign fighters in, perhaps getting more involved in Afghanistan. But I can't see them going much further without really jeopardizing the whole neutrality policy, which again is what their whole identity has been based on for the last 20 years. So I think we're going to see these zigzags in policy where on the one hand Turkmenistan will claim to be neutral, on the other hand when the situation in the southern border becomes volatile, they might get a little bit more involved. But I don't think we're going to have a permanent policy where they will simply either stay out or get fully involved. There's too much risk for Turkmenistan to do that.
Having not a permanent policy, is this a good policy, by the way?
The Turkmen know what their interests are better than I do. I mean, clearly it would be in their interest to make arrangements with certain actors and to maintain those kind of arrangements. But I think domestically, they'll be risking a lot of things. And after all, staying in power is an important interest for everyone. And I think they would really be risking much heavier Russian involvement if they were to have a solid policy towards Afghanistan. As you saw, you had the Russian minister come in, talk about providing some arms. But if Turkmenistan finally said, we're going to confront the Taliban, they would really be telling Russia that, yes, we are willing to entertain Russian troops being here. We're willing to do all these things, which would be very risky. The status quo, even a bad status quo, tends to be better for countries than trying all these new strategies, and again, a very, very volatile region.
Bruce, the visit by the Russian defense minister, we spoke in our previous podcast a little bit on that subject. So what kind of game changer is it in terms of Turkmenistan's approach to situation in northern Afghanistan?
Well, it's practically like publicizing the fact that the Kremlin does not believe that Turkmenistan can control the situation. There's a lot of questions in Moscow about what their ability is. So that's been thrown out there for the international media, and I think everyone saw that for what it's worth, Russia, who probably has as much information on what's happening in that part of Afghanistan as any outside power, does not feel that the Turkmen are in a position to deal with potential complications coming in there. So that does suggest that, at least the view from the Kremlin is the Turkmen military and security forces are weak, unable to deal with something rapidly developing situation, and are in need of help, or at least some kind of backroom assurance that if things do go bad, we can help you out. Now, of course, it's the same with Dostum. We were talking earlier. Russia is unlikely to help Turkmenistan without getting something in return, and that's a big question. And at the same time, as Gennady was just saying, this just shatters that whole facade. Well, I mean, they've kept up of neutrality. They've kept it up, but if all of a sudden they have to turn to an outside power for help, especially Russia, it raises a lot of questions in people's minds about the wisdom of neutrality and how far they're going to get with this policy, because it's supposed to be the ultimate defense for the country, is that they don't get involved in other people's problems. So they shouldn't, in theory, need anyone to come and help them to defend their own borders. But, like I said, if you look at the Turkmen coverage of Shoigu's visit, it was very flat. And there wasn't very much. They exchanged some comments about the evils of international terrorism and stuff. There was no specifics at all. Russian media was much more specific about what happened and provided far more details. But as far as the Turkmen people saw, it was just a routine visit to discuss things which are discussed all the time when world leaders or top officials meet each other. So, this is the tightrope that the Turkmen government is on right now. Russia doesn't feel they can handle the situation, or might not be able to handle the situation. Turkmenistan has seemed to have accepted Russian help in an emergency situation, but in the meantime, the people, as far as the people know, there really still is not a problem along the Afghan border.
Now, the involvement of Russia in any possible way in this Afghan border affair thing, I mean, it's interesting from Afghanistan's point of view, especially taking into consideration that Afghanistan has a cold past with the Russian invasion of its own country. So how that the visit by the Russian minister to Turkmenistan and the exchange of ideas in possibility of Russian help to Turkmenistan to secure the Afghan border is viewed in Afghanistan or discussed in Afghanistan?
There was not much reaction to that visit, because things are handled in that part of northern Afghanistan locally. And locally, people, I think Turkmenistan is not that much worried. That might be, as Bruce said, that Russians concerned, but there was not that much on the Afghan side, reacting to that visit or showing any concern. And the reason is that the Turkmen-Afghan border area, which when you have a closer look at it, is mostly populated either by Pashtuns in Badghis in Faryab area, or by Uzbeks. Very little part of them are populated by hardcore Turkmen who may have interest to infiltrate inside Turkmenistan. They know that the Turkmen authorities and the Russians, they know that Uzbeks and Pashtuns are not willing to infiltrate. They simply don't have the powers, the Taliban, the Pashtun Talibans in Uzbeks, because they don't see anyone welcoming there, and they don't see that much power to support them to go inside Afghanistan. The only threat and the only fears are from tough Turkmen Taliban, who are not controlling that part of Turkmen area, like Akinai and Khoi in this area, which is which they have power.
So, as an Afghan, having extensive knowledge of Russian invasion of the country, what do you see? What the reaction will be from the Afghan side about possibility of greater involvement of Russia in this area?
Well, if that involvement is...
I mean, today it is just a discussion, not discussed much, but practical involvement, if that comes through in some point.
If that involvement is at the level of sending boots into the ground, that will, of course, have a negative or strong reaction from the Afghans. But if the involvement is to the level of sending weapons, ammunitions, or kind of this logistic support, that will, I think, from the Afghan side, would be welcomed. And of course, Taliban will be angry about it.
Taliban will be angry about that. We have to wrap up our discussion here, but the final note I want to take from all of you is, now we understand things are rapidly changing for the worse in northern Afghanistan, and the Turkmenistan's policy to deal with that is at best unpredictable, confusing. So what Turkmenistan has to do going forward to fix it, if there's anything to be fixed? Bruce, let's start with you.
I would say that the Turkmen are in a bad position of they can only react to something that happens. I don't think they can initiate much action that's going to help out their situation too much. They can try to hold talks with all kinds of different factions up there, and that's probably about the best they can do. They're one serious incident away from being dragged into this. A mass shooting along the border that left 20 or 30 Turkmen soldiers or border guards dead, or blew up a border post, would be something that they simply couldn't ignore. It would certainly put a lot of Russian pressure on Ashgabat to do something about it, and I think it would change Ashgabat's position toward Afghanistan immediately.
Dr. Rutkovich, so what Turkmenistan can do better in response to what is happening, the changing situation in just across the border?
Yeah, like I said, I agree entirely with Bruce. I don't think Turkmenistan has the military or economic power to make much of a difference in Afghanistan. And they are a few incidents from getting involved, an involvement which is going to hurt them very severely. So their best policy is to fortify their border and to make sure that an incident does not happen. Don't react to Taliban provocations, if there are any, and make it more difficult for any potential rogue groups of Taliban from trying to infiltrate the border and killing people. Just stay out and avoid any more direct involvement, because it will not end well for them if they do get involved.
Right. I mean, final note.
I think I agree with my colleagues that as much as they stay out of the conflict, and that will serve them best in also providing more and more economic support to the local population. That will create a kind of good feeling about Turkmenistan, and which as I said before, it goes both to the government and Taliban side. I personally think that the current involvement of taking a couple of groups for treatment is not something which will provoke the Taliban. So far, nothing went wrong, as Bruce said. But if there is more involvement, like sending weapons to the Turkmen militia who are fighting against Taliban, or sending troops, or giving this kind of logistic support, that will really provoke Taliban, which I don't think Turkmenistan will be doing.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Amin Mutakik, a journalist from northern Afghanistan, the director of the radio Mashal, which broadcasts to troubled region of Pakistan, for your insightful comments. Also, big thanks goes to Dr. Gennady Rutkovich, Central Asia specialist. He's also assistant professor in political science at Georgia College. Dr. Rutkovich, thank you for being a part of the Majlis today. And Bruce Pannier, editor of Kishlak Awazi, Central Asia blog at Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. Thank you, gentlemen, for being part of the Majlis today. That's it from me, Mohammed Tahir, director of the Turkmen service at Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. Bye-bye.